Last thing I'd like to do to this lower third is add a little picture right here so that we can see who this person is up close. Since some of these shots are probably going to be from a distance, just so we can identify who the person is. Again, this is all just made up, but that's what I'm thinking. I'm going to go back to my project panel and I want to import some more assets. I again pulled some stock photos from Adobe Stock, and I'll just use those as placeholders. Double click to import and grab these 3 pictures of some surfer stock photography. Click on import with all 3 of those selected, and then I'll make one more folder called images and drag these right into it. Now I don't want to use the entire picture as the headshot, so I'm going to need to crop in on the face. And the way that I want to do this is first by just making a shape the size that I want the photo to be. And this is probably going to shift my design over. If I hit the apostrophe key with my comp panel active, that'll bring up my title and action safe guides. And if I zoom in and pan around, that text on this first line is right up against the title safe edge. So I'm definitely going to have to shift it all over. So let's just start by collapsing some of this. And why don't we set up some parenting here? So for this location line of text, I'm going to parent that to the second text box. So now if I move the text box around, the text moves with it. And same thing for this first line text. I'm going to parent that to the first text box. And then I'll also parent the second text box to the first text box. So now I can just move everything around just by moving that one text box layer. So what I want to do is click and drag and then hold shift so it only moves on the x-axis about probably this far. So this is about where I want the headshot to be. And I think I can base it on the shape of this text box. So I'm just going to duplicate that layer by pressing Control or Command D, and I'll rename this layer by pressing Enter, and I'll call it Headshot Box. And I know I want this to exist below the other 2 boxes, so I'll drag it down, and then I'll just move it over. I'm going to put the center of the layer off to the side here because that's where I want the center of this photo to be, and then let's just change the size down. The colors of the fill don't really matter, so I'm not worried about the gradient because I'm going to fill this with an image, but maybe something around this size to start. And what I want to do is bring out one of these pictures. So I'll just grab the first one and drag it right on top, and then kind of just reposition this so that the surfer's head is about where it should be. Now, this is really hard to see, and what I want to do is scale down from the center of this woman's face. So I'm going to zoom out a little bit and just pan over so I can see the anchor point of my layer. If you remember, this tool up here is called the Pan Behind or Anchor Point tool. And if I use that, I can click and drag this anchor point to go anywhere on the photo, which will allow me to transform the layer from that point. So when I scale now that this is set right there on her nose, it's going to scale that image up and down from her nose. But we still have the issue of all this extra information in the photo that we don't really want to see. So what I'm going to do is matte off that section of the photo using what's called a track matte. And this is done with 2 different layers and a new set of switches that we haven't looked at. Now, currently, we can't actually see them. There are lots of little switches and buttons and menus in the timeline, and having them all open at once can be a lot. And depending on how I'm working, I might only want to see a certain set of switches. But there's this button right at the base of After Effects that says Toggle Switches/Modes. And if I click on that, it's going to swap out some of these controls for another set of controls. If I do it again, it goes back. What this is actually doing is just changing these 2 views on and off. It's switching between them. If I click once, it goes back to here and there. So this button is the switches pane, and this button is the transfer control pane. And I could have both of them on at once if I wanted to right there, then that toggle switches and modes disappears. But as you can see, that really takes up a lot of my real estate on the timeline. So it's really up to you how you'd like to see it, but we want to have our second switch here, the Expand or Collapse the Transform Controls pane button. We want that enabled so that we can see this track matte column. Now to use this feature, we need to choose another layer to be the track matte for this layer. So that's why we have a drop-down menu with all of the layers in the comp in that list. This is just like the parent and link column where we can choose a different layer to be a parent. Instead of that, we're going to choose the other layer to be the track matte or the mask, alpha matte. There's lots of different terms for this. But I'm going to choose the headshot box layer. And what that's going to do is get rid of everything outside of the bounds of that box. It makes it all invisible. So I can click and drag this layer around now and reposition it however I want. But the only thing that will show up is what's inside that box. And that's why the colors don't really matter of that box because we can't see them. Now, the picture is showing up on top of these other text boxes because even though it's being shaped by this headshot box, in the layer stack, the photo itself is still on top of the other layers. So I need to drag that down below everything else if I want it to show up underneath everything else. That's looking pretty good. I think I just want to resize this box now. So switching back to that layer, I can go into my size and maybe make this bigger. Maybe this should be larger than the actual text boxes so that we can see the face of the surfer a little bit more clearly. And then I could go back into that layer and maybe scale it up a bit and reposition it so it's nice and easy to see. I think I'll just rearrange this a little bit, maybe turn the size of the box down so we're getting closer to a square. Maybe I'll just type in around 250 on the width and the height for the size. And by the way, when you're adjusting numbers in the properties panel or anywhere where you see lots of properties, you can switch to the next one just by pressing the tab key and tab again. It'll keep going down the list. And if you press shift tab, it's gonna go backwards. So that's how I quickly work with the keyboard without having to jump back to my mouse and click into the next property. But let's change that back to 250 by 250 and then just reposition it a little bit so that it fits with the rest of our design. Let's look at this as a whole. I'm gonna fit this up to 100%, turn off my title and action safe guides. And I think this is looking okay. I'm not that thrilled with the design. And honestly, I don't really like how the picture is in the background. So I think I want to rearrange some things, and I might even adjust this design just to feel a little bit more connected instead of so layered and disjointed. So let's actually move that headshot back up to the top, and then I'll need to move this first line of text over a little bit to the right. So I'm just going to click and drag that holding shift so that we can see it entirely. And I think what I want to try is just moving the second text box over to the left so that it overlaps that headshot. And now resize this headshot box to fit the same height of these two lines together. So it's kind of like these two lines are coming out of the photo of the competitor. So let's go to that headshot box and I'll just size that down on the Y until we're about the same size. I'll use my mouse scroll wheel to zoom in there and we'll just reposition this a little bit and resize it until it lines up nicely. So that looks like about the right size. Now I just need to move it up. So I'm going to drag that up a little bit. And I think that fits pretty well. Now it doesn't have to be a rectangle. I could keep the square. If I just change this to 156, I can match the width. That is going to make the box feel a lot smaller though. So I think I am going to push it out just a little bit and then just shift it over. So there we go. It's overlapping both of our text boxes now. And I can simply just resize the photo of the competitor here until I get something that I like. So that feels a lot better to me, but what I'd like to do is maybe incorporate an outline around the photo. So to do that, I'm going to just duplicate this headshot box. So Control or Command D, which by the way, I want to point out that when I made that connection of the track mat, it hides the original layer because it's assuming you don't want to see the contents of that layer. You just want to use it to mask off whatever you're matting. So I'm going to need to re-enable this duplicate layer and I want to drag that all the way up to the top of my layer stack. Now I don't want it to have a fill, I just want the outline. So I'm going to click on the blue fill text right up here and just choose this first option in the list. This is none, no fill at all, and then click OK. Now I'm left with just the outline. It's thin, but I think that's fine. I like the way that that kind of fits the rest of the design. And then I can just reposition this photo as much as I want, scale it down, shift it around until it fits. Now we have something that feels a little bit more connected, more like one solid lower third. I just want to make sure to rename this layer so I stay organized. I'll call this headshot frame, press enter. And I think this design is now ready for some animation. All right, now let's have some fun and actually start making this lower third move. So what I have envisioned in my head is this lower third shooting out from the left side of the screen and kind of revealing the text and the photo. And the way that I'm thinking about doing it is by scaling this box outwards, but I don't want it to scale from the center. I want it to scale from the left edge. So if we just very temporarily, I'll move this anchor point over to the left. This is what I'm picturing. So it shoots out. The second bar shoots out independently and the text is revealed by those boxes scaling out. So I'm gonna undo back to before I started stretching things out and let's think through the different elements that actually need to be moving. So obviously we have the two text boxes that belong to two text layers And then we need something to reveal this photo. And I already have a track matte shaping the opacity of that. So, I can scale this down and up to reveal it in the same way. Maybe I want to have the text come out first and then the photo come out second. I don't know. I'm being really free-formed with this, but let's start by just figuring out how to animate this box on. And before I start manipulating it and animating it, since it's the parent layer to these other layers, it's going to affect those ones. So I'm gonna start by just selecting all of these layers that are parented to something else and click on this menu and just choose none so that there are no parenting relationships in here anymore. Each layer is independent. And I wanna just be focused on this text box. So I could either solo that layer. This solo switch allows you to only look at certain layers, or I could turn off the visibility of other layers. I could even grab some of these other layers and just shift them forward in time so that they don't show up until further on. And I think that's what I'll do for now, since they're gonna be coming in staggered anyway. Not everything is gonna animate all at once. Now, another way to animate this on, other than just scaling the layer, is actually animating the size of the layer. So this size property can be keyframed and we can animate using that value. The thing is, the size of this box is not related to the anchor point at all. So even if I move this anchor point over, I switch to the anchor point tool by using the keyboard shortcut of Y. Even if I move that anchor point over there, this is the layer's anchor point and not the shape within the contents of the layer's anchor point. So when I change the size, that's always gonna be around this midpoint. Now there's another anchor point showing up. This is for the shape group. Remember, there are layers of transform controls within a shape layer. And if I use the anchor point tool to move that, this still isn't gonna change where the size comes from because the size is not the same as the scale. So let me undo a couple of times back to where that anchor point was centered in the layer. And instead, I'll switch to my selection tool, double click on that shape so that I can see that shape group anchor point, switch back to my anchor point tool, click and drag that over while holding shift so it only moves on the X axis, and align it right there so it looks like the anchor point is right where it needs to be. And now instead of scaling the layer itself, I can scale the shape transform controls for that shape group. So if I unlink the X and Y scale by clicking on that little chain icon, now I can scale the X axis independently and it's scaling from that point. So I think this is going to be my best option for scaling the layer. Another reason why I want to do it this way is because notice how it's maintaining the skew, because the skew is another one of the transform properties. So it's applying the scale prior to the skew. If I undo and just change the scale of the layer, you'll notice that that skew, let's go over here, that skew is disappearing. It's flattening out as we scale the entire layer. So let me undo that one more time and we'll start adding some keyframes on the scale property for the shape group. So obviously I want it to end at 100%, so I'll set a keyframe there, and I'm just a little over a second forward in time. Timing doesn't matter at this point, but I'll go back to the start of the layer and then change that scale down to 0. So I'll just type in 0 and press enter, and now I have 2 keyframes going between 0 and 100%. And if I press the space bar, I can play that back and it's animating on. That's great. Now that's definitely taking longer than I'd like to animate, so I'm just gonna click and drag this second keyframe back and play it again. This is the life of an animator. You're gonna try something and then preview it. Make an adjustment, see what it looks like. Going back and forth a lot. Now, honestly, this background is a little bit distracting, so I'm gonna just shut the visibility of that video layer off so I can focus on just this rectangle animating out. That looks pretty good. I think the timing might be okay, but it is a little boring. And the reason for that is because it's scaling the same amount every frame of the animation. So it's a linear animation, meaning constant change one frame to the next, start to end. But with animation in After Effects, we can control what happens between any 2 keyframes. So let me zoom in here on the timeline by pressing the plus button on my keyboard a couple of times. Select these 2 keyframes and then go up to the animation menu, down to Keyframe Assistant, and then this option right here, Easy Ease. You might already be familiar with this. This is something that's available in Premiere, but what it's going to do is smooth the in and out of each keyframe. So if I click Easy Ease, my icons for these keyframes have changed. They're now this hourglass shape, and if I play this back, it looks a little bit more smooth. Now, it might be a little hard to see out of context, so what I'm gonna do is duplicate this layer, and I'm gonna teach you a keyboard shortcut. Just press the U key when any layer is selected, and that will bring up any keyframed properties. You don't have to go digging through the layer, it just brings up those keyframes. And what I wanna do is convert these back to being linear keyframes instead of easy ease. To do that, I'm gonna hold down Control or Command on a Mac and click on either one of them with both selected. That converts them back to linear. Now I'll just click and drag that layer up so we can see this is the linear layer, this is the easy eased layer, and let's play it back. You see the difference? It's a little strange seeing them side by side because there's almost a wobble, but what's happening is it's taking a little longer for this one to start because we're easing into the motion. And then it catches up and passes the linear animation as it eases into the second keyframe. So it's a slower start and a slower end, which gives a more smooth animation. So let me delete that text box and we'll just watch this easy eased version a couple more times. And it is kind of subtle, but it definitely is smoother. Now I'm gonna set my work area to right here so I don't have to keep moving my playhead back. And to do that with a keyboard, remember N for end, that's the end of my work area. B for beginning, N for end. I'll play that back and now it's going to loop that range for me so I can just watch this happen over and over again. Now this is great, but I can actually make this easing even more apparent. And this is more of an advanced feature of After Effects, but I think that it is 100% worth knowing even as a beginner in After Effects. So I'm gonna duplicate this layer one more time. Again, press U to bring up the keyframes, and I'll move this layer up one more time. So this is my easy eased copy now, and this one I'm going to modify. So I'm going to just click on the scale property, which selects both keyframes, and I'm gonna click on this button right here. This is the graph editor. And it changes my timeline from showing me the layers and keyframes to something completely different and honestly a little bit confusing. Let me just move this up a little bit so we have more room. But what this is a graph that's just expressing a change in value over time. There are actually two different types of graphs in the graph editor. This one is called the value graph. This red line is representing the X scale on this property. Since there are two values, we have two colors. So the X scale, scale X you can see there, and the green one is scale Y. And what this is telling us is down at the beginning where our first keyframe is, we have a value of 0 on the X and 100 on the Y. And over time, the X scale changes to be 100% as well. Now for some reason, the graph editor in After Effects just is a little bit finicky when it comes to properties that have multiple values in them, like the scale or position. And it's a little confusing to look at a graph like this. What I'm going to recommend you do is switch over to the other type of graph. And to do that, we're gonna click on this button right here. And my menu's going off screen, so let me just resize this a little bit so you can see. I'll click on that. And at the top, I have Auto Select Graph Type checked. That means that After Effects is going to choose which graph to show you depending on the property that you have selected. And it's really just guessing. It's deciding for you which graph it thinks you would want to use. If I change this to Edit Value Graph, we're gonna get the same view. That's what we were looking at. Instead, I wanna change this to Edit Speed Graph. And now our graph has changed shape a little bit. So let me scale this back up so we can see all of After Effects. And this is another graph that's representing the same change just in terms of speed instead of value. So at the beginning and the end, we have no change in speed or velocity. This value is not changing at the start and end of our animation. In between though, this red line, again, the X scale, is changing and it's a curve because we easy eased the keyframes. I can take that easing off if I select these keyframes one more time and click on this button right here, Convert Selected Keyframes to Linear. Now I've just got two straight lines because the change or the rate of change is constant between keyframes on both the X and the Y scale. Easy easing these keyframes, I can do that with this button right here, changes this to a bell shape. So this is telling me that it starts at 0 velocity, gradually gains speed up to a max velocity of about 200% per second, and then eases back out, drops down to 0. So that's my easy ease bell curve. But what I can do in my curve editor, if I select one of the keyframes, is this little handle right here, this yellow circle, it's attached to this square, which represents the keyframe. These are called influence handles, and it allows me to custom dial in the easing between two keyframes. So if I click and drag this one to the left, it's going to move that red curve's shape towards the left. And now just looking at this curve, I can tell that this change in value is going to change much more rapidly at the start, get to a peak speed sooner, and then ease out and start slowing down a lot more gradually. Let's play that back and compare the two. So top is easy ease, the bottom one is the custom easing. You see how much smoother the end of this animation is on the second one where I custom dialed this in? Since this is an animation coming in and revealing the text box, I really don't need to ease out of the first keyframe. There's no reason for it to start slowly. So I'm gonna exaggerate this even further by selecting the first keyframe and grabbing this influence handle, and instead of moving it to the right, drag it more to the left so that it starts out very fast. I'll just play it back, and now that text box is shooting out much more quickly. And I can do this as extreme as I'd like. Again, this is a little hard to look at because it's showing both the red X and green Y axes on the same graph. So there are multiple handles and they kind of overlap each other. But because the Y scale is not changing, I don't need to worry about that. Instead, I'll just grab this influence handle and move it all the way over to the left. And if I click and hold, you can see now the influence is 100% incoming to that keyframe. And this is going to appear much more snappy now. Now there's lots to learn about the graph editor. There are many, many more controls that you can learn about and know about, but even just that little bit of understanding how to increase the influence and make the easing more dramatic is such a huge thing and will make your animations look so much more custom and thought through. So don't be afraid of this graph editor. Get in there and start easing your keyframes. One thing that I should point out is that I, by default, have snapping enabled, so I can do more than just drag this left and right. If I drag it up, that's gonna change things a lot, but it will snap to the baseline or to other keyframes. So I tend to have that on. The second button right here is the transform box when multiple keyframes are selected. Now, you may or may not want that on. Generally for the speed graph, I don't need it, so that's usually off for my setup. But snapping is very useful. If you don't have snapping on, you could accidentally move this, a little bit above, and then it's not gonna ease to a complete stop. It's almost like it's hitting a wall at the end. So just be aware of that. Turn on snapping, turn off that guide if you don't need it. And the reason why I'm suggesting you use the speed graph over the value graph is because every property in After Effects supports the speed graph. Not every property supports the value graph. And even though many motion designers prefer the value graph, there's just no reason for you to get caught up with it at this stage in your After Effects journey. The speed graph is gonna get the job done for this project and many projects. So that's why we're gonna be using it in this class. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and delete that other easy eased box one more time. And here we are with our custom easing of this box shooting out to the left. I like that a lot. I'm just gonna shift it forward a little bit so that I have a little bit of empty frames before it shoots out. And honestly, that probably was a little too extreme at the beginning. So let's just go back into the graph editor. Again, select that property. If you don't, it will be blank, but you could just click on a property again to bring that graph up. And maybe I'll just ease out of that first keyframe just slightly and pull the easing down to around 90 into the second keyframe. There we go. So now it's shooting out, easing very strongly into that second keyframe. Let's do the same thing for the second text box. So I'm gonna bring that one back, and I should be able to copy and paste these keyframes after I've changed my anchor point. If I don't change my anchor point first, let me just select those and press Control-C to copy. I'll go to the start of this layer and set a keyframe on the scale for that text box, and then paste. Since I didn't move the anchor point, it's scaling from the center of the layer. The easing is the same, the timing is the same, but I need to change that anchor point. So what I need to do is make sure that I go past that second keyframe, past when the value is changing, and my scale's at 100 by 100, switch to my pan behind or anchor point tool, click and drag that over while holding Shift, and let go right on the left edge of that box. And now it's going to scale from the left edge. So let's play that back. I'll extend my work area a little bit. So now we've got two boxes staggered in time as they shoot out using the same easing. That's looking pretty good. Let's bring our text layers back in time now. So I'll bring this first one back. By the way, if you hold down Shift while dragging layers, they will snap to various things on the timeline, keyframes, the playhead, layer starts, in and out points. So I'm going to align those with the 2 text boxes. And then let's set track mats up for each of those text layers. So I'm going to use my track mat pick whip this time instead of the drop down menu. Click and drag for that line of text to the first text box. Now again, that's going to make the first text box disappear. In this case, I don't want that to happen, so I'm just going to turn it back on. But now my text is only going to show up where that text box is, so it's revealing the text. And I'll do the same thing for the second line of text. Track mat pick whip, text box 2, make sure to re-enable the visibility of that text box and play that back. So now we're revealing the text. Very cool. All right, now another thing I'd like to do is have these lines also moving, not just scaling, but also shooting out to the right. So I want to add in some position keyframes. Let's again start with just the first text box. And since I'm already animating on the shape group, the transform controls for the shape group and not the layer, I'm going to continue adding keyframes there. And I'll show you why in just a second. But let's scroll down with that layer selected to the shape transform controls. And aligned with the final keyframe for the scale animation, I'm going to add a position keyframe. That way the position and scale animation both end at the same time. Then I'll bring this back to the start of the layer while holding Shift to snap to it and change this position value so that it moves over to the left. So I'll just click and drag this to the left on the X position and just pan over a little bit so I can see how much that's moving. And now it's going to move and scale at the same time. So let's play that back. Okay, cool. Now the reason why it looks a little weird is because we have eased keyframes on the scale, but not on the position. And I want those easings to match, to align. And I could start by selecting those keyframes, again, going up to Animation, Keyframe Assistant, Easy Ease, which the keyboard shortcut for that is F9. And then go into my graph editor and try and recreate this curve to match the other one as close as possible. And that might be pretty good, but I'd like to be more precise than that. So instead of that, what I'm going to do is select both the position and the scale. And you'll see that I can now view both of them at once. And they're all color coded and I can see those color labels over here. So this lighter pink line is the position, the red and green are the scale. What I can do now is select all of those keyframes, reset it all by easy easing one more time. And then with just the last set of keyframes selected, I just drew a box to make that selection. I will click and drag to the left so that the easings are applied at the same amount. So I'm going around 90% influence there, and I'll back this side up just a little bit. Again, select both keyframes, then move the handles. So there we go. Now my easing is identical between both properties, and it's going to animate much more consistently. Now let me show you why I did the position in the transform group for the shape, and not on the actual position transform controls for the layer. The reason is because there are no keyframes on the position for the layer, I can move the layer wherever I want and my animation is totally preserved. Whereas if I had added keyframes to that layer and then tried to move it, it's going to add more position keyframes. So since the animation is contained within the shape group, that makes it a little bit more flexible in terms of placement and being a little bit more non-destructive with my workflow. All right, I don't want to see all this extra stuff, so I'm just going to once again press the U key to isolate just the keyframed properties. And let's do the same thing to this text box too. So I'll go to the second keyframe, go down to the shape transform controls and set a position keyframe, go back to the start of the layer, and then just move it over to the left a bit. I'm not worried about this being the same amount of position as the first text box. I think it'll be okay and actually look pretty good if they're offset a little bit. So let's do this one more time. Select these keyframes, easy ease them with the keyboard shortcut of F9 this time. Go into the graph editor and do our custom easing. I'm just gonna select these two keyframes right here, pull the influence out around 90%, grab these two keyframes, back it off a little bit, and then play that back. Cool, I think that's looking really good. I'd like to continue some of that motion from the text boxes into the actual text layers. And I can't just parent these two layers to the text boxes because the actual transformations for these layers aren't changing. It's just the shape groups within. So it's not going to inherit those controls. But that's okay because I want them to be moving at a different rate as well. So I'm again going to go to the second keyframe set on the text box 1 and set a position keyframe on this text layer. So open up the transform controls for that layer. set a keyframe on the position, and then move back to the start of the animation. Now I can't see the text, but I can see the bounding box. So I'm just gonna click and drag here on the comp while holding Shift and move the text about that much. This is all, again, just arbitrary. I'm gonna try it and see what it looks like. So now the text is moving in as the box is moving. They're both moving in the same direction. Again, this is developing a little bit of a visual language for this lower third graphic. Let's easy ease those keyframes with F9, go into the graph editor and adjust this a bit. So again, 90%, drag this back a little bit and play that back to see how it looks. Very cool. Now the text box is moving almost the same distance as the text. I want to make a little bit more contrast in the movement between those two layers. So what I'll do is go to the start of this text layer aligned with the keyframe, click and drag while holding Shift, and that will update the keyframe value. So now it won't travel as much and we should have more contrast between the text box and the text layer. There we go. So there is movement to the text, but it's very evident that it is a separate element from the actual text box. Let's do the same thing to the second line of text, aligning this with this second set of keyframes for the text box too. Set a position keyframe by going into the transform and pressing the position stopwatch. Back it up to the start of the layer and move this over while holding Shift just a bit. We'll easy ease these keyframes with F9, go into the graph editor and modify this influence handle. So this is the back and forth process that I do on almost every set of keyframes, but once you get used to it, you'll fall into a rhythm, it'll become much more familiar, and you'll have no problems making these adjustments. Now we have two text boxes and two text layers animating in. It's very snappy, nice and smooth. I like the direction that we're headed in.